Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Kunzman, MD, and today's topic on understanding your cholesterol profile is specifically for my cousin who requested this. Okay, so hold on to your hats. I'm going to try to make this fairly simple, even though there is some new information on the cholesterol levels themselves. Okay, so when you initially get a cholesterol profile, I usually need to see everything in its context. So the lipid profile all by itself, to me, doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't have the hormones analyzed, the triglycerides in its component, the sugars analyzed, as well as a vitamin D level. So that being said, cholesterol is a base compound that is used for a lot of processes. It is need to make our hormone base. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and some of the other cholesterol-laden hormones need that to build on themselves. And then vitamin D is also has cholesterol in its base. So I need to see these things in context because let's say vitamin D is running low, or you're menopausal or in andropause and the testosterone is low. The body's going to compensate and try to liberate some more cholesterol to make these compounds, and hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, all that being said, I'm going to focus on the cholesterol profile itself. So if you look at a cholesterol profile, the basic one will give you the total cholesterol, but it's also going to make commentary on LDL, HDL, VLDL, and some triglycerides. So what does that mean? Well, cholesterol itself, if it wasn't bound to lipoproteins, would just float in the bloodstream and would not be able to get transported and remain somewhat water soluble. Again, cholesterol is more of a lipid moiety. So to get it to move around within the serous environment in the blood, it needs to be carried by transport proteins, which are called lipoproteins, to carry that cholesterol around to get it to the cellular areas for its function and to make these hormones, etc. The HDL, LDL, VLDL, they are actually talking about those lipoproteins that we can measure carrying the cholesterol around. So in its crudest sense, there are chylomicrons, which get generated around the liver and the gut system and start making the base for these lipoproteins. And LDL is what we call a large density lipoprotein. So LDL has been termed bad cholesterol. And it's bad cholesterol, namely because it is carrying ApoB lipoproteins to get it to circulate around. And ApoB lipoproteins, especially in high number and high volume, has been much more associated with atherogenic properties or clogging of that artery. We're going to get back to that in a little bit more detail. So we have the LDL, large density lipoprotein, bad cholesterol, which is bad lipoprotein. Then we have HDL. HDL is a higher density lipoprotein, and it carries ApoA on its moiety to get it to traverse the environment. But one of the proposed mechanisms about HDL and good cholesterol is that it is taking it out of circulation, literally, and taking it back to the liver to get broken down. Now, there is not quite as much emphasis on the VLDL, which is the very low density lipoprotein, or the intermediate density lipoprotein. But I also want to make mention about triglycerides. Triglycerides is not cholesterol. Triglycerides are fats, but they are not cholesterol. So in other words, fats are different than cholesterol. Triglycerides are actually manufactured when there is calorie excess, and they are trying to package in storage units. So typically triglycerides, in my mind, is indicative of more of a carbohydrate metabolic overload, more of a diabetic phenomenon, or a fatty liver phenomenon, where the body has just seen way too much excess calories in what it needs, and it's trying to package it up as fats, fatty acids. Again, different than cholesterol. Remember, cholesterol is there to make your hormones and your cell walls and your myelin and your brain lining. Okay, so let's get back. And that would be your base profile. And I think most people receive that basic profile when they are getting their lipids drawn. Let's get into a little bit more of what I will go after in functional medicine, which is what we call a lipid particle analysis. Okay? A lipid particle analysis will actually take some of that LDL or bad cholesterol and fractionate it out and give us more information. And a lot of this information doesn't have to be run every single time you get a lipid profile, because pieces of this actually have genetic underpinnings. But it will help us determine whether you are more proatherogenic. In other words, are you more genetically predisposed to blocking those arteries, or are you not? So in the lipid particle analysis, LDL will receive a lot of attention in this. So of the base of low density lipoproteins, we can actually figure out if you have the amount of them, let's say, but the type of particles in the LDL. So if you have what I call the nice, fluffy, buoyant LDL, that is much less likely to traumatize the artery, because think of those big fluffy beach balls traversing your arteries and just getting to where they need to get to. However, if your LDL, if you have a lot of the small particle, now think of the small particle as BBs, like BBs from a BB gun. Now imagine having a lot of those that have the potential for those BBs to be traversing through the artery and causing a lot of damage along the way. So you certainly are hoping for a lot of the fluffy beach balls rather than a lot of the BBs. But then I will like to go one step further. So the one step further is checking ApoB, and even to that note, lipoprotein A. Okay, so the good cholesterol, the HDL, typically will have ApoA subunit on it. And ApoA typically does not cause much trauma to the artery. Now it can, but there are some unusual chemical reactions that would make that happen. So let's focus mostly on ApoB. So each LDL cholesterol particle unit will have one ApoB on it, which is a protein, to help transport it. So you can measure how much ApoB you have transporting on the LDL. Now don't forget, ApoB is not on the good cholesterol. On the HDL, it is not on the good cholesterol. ApoB is only on the bad cholesterol or the LDL or the low dose lipoprotein or low density lipoprotein. ApoB in high amounts has been associated with a much higher risk of cardiovascular disease and strokes. So in this regard, it would be wise for us to figure out if that is in our underpinnings with our genetic blueprint, because those people may want to pull the trigger a little bit sooner with medication to modify that. Now, I will give fair warning that we don't necessarily have any medication per se that can go after and cut down the ApoB, but it can cut down the cholesterol and therefore the carrying capacity. But again, the ApoB cannot necessarily get modified to a large degree, but this is where research and pharmaceutical technology is moving towards. So when we talk about statin therapies, it can modify it to a very small degree, and that may be enough for some people. And then we also have some niacin, which is quite old school, which can help to a small degree, as well as major dietary changes that would include a lot of vegetation and a lot of fiber. So there are things that we can do to modify genetics, although in this case, it's a little bit difficult to do that in a large percentage or dramatic way. So we have the LDL with the ApoB on it, and the most highly atherogenic subunit that we can measure that would really give us pause to assess those arteries to dramatically modify your risk for atherosclerosis is lipoprotein A. So if you think about the unit, the apoprotein B, and a little subunit of lipoprotein A on it, that little bugger really can cause trouble. Again, this only needs to be analyzed once every so often, or maybe even once, just to see what the genetic blueprint is. But lipoprotein A, which is a little subunit found on ApoB, can oxidize. And in that oxidation process, think of that little subunit as becoming rancid when it's oxidized. But what it also can do is start setting up fibrinogen or blocking fibrinogen, and in that regard, setting up clotting cascade within that artery, and that clotting cascade is what starts the blockage process, in addition to the oxidation, which can cause trauma to that artery. So you can see that even cholesterol understanding is moving into the future, which can help us figure out, which is now helping us figure out why there are some people with higher amounts of basic cholesterol who don't wind up having clogged arteries. And we also have some people that don't necessarily have a high cholesterol in general or total cholesterol, but they have the genetic underpinnings with a higher amount of ApoB with the lipoprotein A on it. Again, lipoprotein A being very vascular, traumatizing, and vascular toxic, which can go on to cause your cardiovascular and stroke predisposition. So again, we have a base profile, which can help you ascertain if your lifestyle modifications and your functional approaches to the cholesterol are actually helping, and or whether or not any of the medication that you're on is helping to get the job done while you are assessing your risks associated with ApoB and lipoprotein A. So what would I do in those situations? If the base profile is looking pretty good, that may be the end of the chapter, so long as the patient is clinically well. If we start noticing some disruptions, such as high triglycerides and a disproportionate good cholesterol, bad cholesterol ratio, and the patient might be overweight, it is probably time to dive into the deeper particle analysis, ApoB, lipoprotein A. And if we start finding those positive findings, that person may need to be stratified even more detailed to figure out if we actually have endothelial damage or if we have blockages that are sinister and not clinically manifesting themselves as a heart attack or a stroke. And that person may want to do a calcium score, may want to do some stress testing, and maybe even have to go so far as angiography to see the health of those vessels. Because again, taking care of it then before we have a catastrophe is the whole reason why we assess your blood work. Again, there is the piece of sugars and diabetes playing a role in here, but today's discussion was the cholesterol and the cholesterol profile, and I hope you have a little bit more of an understanding going forward. If not, please submit some questions to me down below, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my website at nataliekunsmanmd.com, and we can consult on you whenever you are ready. Again, Natalie Kunzman, MD. Until we meet again, be well.